I want to do a very short video just to answer the question about how you are determining whether a variable is relevant to a research question or not. So, some of your assignments, actually, most of your assignments are going to require you to come up with relevant variables for a research question which you would then use to create your data set or create your data sheet. So the question is, how then do you determine whether a variable is relevant to a research question or not? So now for this, I'm going to use this research question that says, does being premenopausal affect how often diabetic women use gynecological services? So how do we come up with variables that are going to be relevant? We have to look at what sort of data will the research be looking into collecting, and we can get that from the research question. We know that there is a few information we have here. Number one is being premenopausal. This is one variable. Well, sorry, one condition that the researcher is very likely going to be looking for, whether the women in her research are premenopausal or not. Another that is going to look at is if they are diabetic. Because that's one of the questions that the researcher is interested in, whether they are diabetic. But they're also interested in whether they are women. Now, depending on it, the researcher may decide that the way that they are deciding who fits into women is going to go by gender identity, or they're going to decide whether it's going to go by the sex that was assigned at birth. It's really all up to them. But either ways, the researcher will be looking into what in terms of gender or sex about it. Another thing that is going to be looking at is gynecological services. So it's going to be whether they use gynecological services. So that's going to be one of the variables that they're going to be interested in, whether they are using gynecological services, but also how often they use gynecological services. So there are a couple of things that you can use to kind of get an indication of what sorts of information that the researcher, what sorts of data that the researcher is going to be collecting, and those come from the question. So based off on the question, we know they're going to be looking at um, whether or not they are premenopausal. It's also going to ask how often gynecological services are used. It's also going to ask if gynecological services are used. Actually, if should come before how often. This is if gynecological services are used. And then how often it is used. It is also going to ask what the gender is, or participant gender. Or you could also ask participants sex assigned at birth, so that this way, if the researcher wants to include trans men in their research, they will be able to capture that if that's what they are interested in. They're also going to check about their diabetes diagnosis, whether they've been diagnosed of diabetes or not, since that's very important to it. So let's see. So Based off on the research questions alone, we've been able to find six variables that are relevant to this research question or to this research. So this is how you figure out which research question is, which variable, sorry, this is how you figure out which variable is relevant and which is not, in case you're trying to find that out. Another thing also you should be aware of is that there are different ways that you can phrase your variable so that it either comes out as a numerical value or as a categorical value. I'm going to use if gynecological services are used. So this is the question. So typically this question would have gone as a yes or no, but which is categorical. But they may decide, I don't want this question to be in categorical, I want it to be in numerical. So you can switch that up to put, let's say, how often, or sorry, how many times in last year did you use gynecological services? So if anybody says zero, then you know that gynecological services were not used. If they say five, then you know that gynecological services were used 5 times. If they say 10, you know gynecological services were used 10 times. But this question can then help you to answer also this question of how often was it used, because you know that the person who used it 10 times used it far more than the person who did 5 times. So you can have a question and create a variable based off on how you want your value to be, whether you want your value to be categorical or you want it to be numerical. So you can actually switch that up. I hope this helps you guys in figuring out this assignment, but also in future assignments to help you in creating your variables as well as your values. Do have a lovely day. Bye.